Today I am pleased to introduce two amazing CFHA members and leaders in our organization who have graciously agreed to talk to us about this really cool topic today, advancing the science of integrated behavioral health through collaborative research, with a special focus on practice-based research networks. And I'm so happy to have them join us, but I also recognize they have a lot of material to cover. So I'm just going to tell you that they're the two of the most amazing people in our community. They have served in leadership roles in CFHA in a lot of different arenas, both as president of our board of directors, but also as a leader of one of the various leaders of our research and evaluation committee, constantly trying to push the field forward, both within CFHA as well as outside in the Society of Behavioral Medicine, in their own organizations at UC San Diego. I am sure I could read their detailed descriptions, but I think I'd like to spend the time on the actual content that they're going to present today. So we're going to start with them kind of sharing some of their views of practice-based research networks, how valuable they are, how we can use them to foster integrated behavioral health research. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time of talking about how to incorporate that and whether there's value in incorporating that in our CFHA organizational plans through the Research and Evaluation Committee. So I will turn it over to them, and I will give you a nice reminder about 30 minutes in to kind of shift over to discussion. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, go ahead, Bill. Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, why don't you start? Because then I'll introduce, and then I'll launch right into the initial slides.
Oh, okay. Well, so I'm just going to say I'm Rusty Kallenberg, and I was the division chief for family medicine, head of clinical family medicine here at UCSD for 20 years, and have been involved in CFHA since, I would say, 1995, having attended the first meeting in Washington, D.C., and had a few absences here and there. But when I came to UCSD, I got hooked up with Joellen Patterson and Todd Edwards, and that sealed my fate, having already been introduced to the concept by Karen Weiss at GW. And so I've been playing a role ever since, and it's interesting because CFHA's growth and development over the years has paralleled our efforts at UCSD, which we started as soon as I got here in 2001. And it's been a lot of nice back and forth, kind of trying to use the national group to guide our efforts here and to share what we think are brilliant discoveries here with the national group. So I'll just turn it over to Bill to introduce himself and take it away.
Great. Well, yeah, trained as a clinical health psychologist, been involved in CFHA for a bit, on the board for FSH, and really was very fortunate to return to UCSD when Rusty took over the chairmanship for the department. And yeah, we've been proceeding along, trying to kind of develop the optimal care we can. Now our services have been around for about 22 some odd years. So anyway, so let me kind of just let you know that it feels like it's been 3 pandemics ago that I was actually involved in a PBRN. One certainly Rusty will kind of describe later, collaborative care research network, and maybe lessons learned from that. I was involved in the San Diego PBRN, which I think we won an award amongst our colleagues of having the best name. It was called SurfNet, San Diego Unified Research Federation, or whatever in the world it was. But anyway, just kind of, I think what's going to be most important is our final slide is trying to kind of propose a couple of questions and issues that this group should start to deal with to see if PBRNs might be one method by which CFHA can kind of help support and promote the evidence base that we have. So Rusty, if you'll advance, please. So really if you will, the problem is, this group, many people in this group have contributed mightily to what we've accomplished over the last 2 decades in terms of trying to develop skills of our members in doing evaluation, programmatic research. Certainly Jen and a lot of you have been kind of whether it be evidence to go, certainly a research an evaluation track in our annual meeting, giving certificates to people if they've attended certain experiential learnings to try and develop those skills. But really, there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. It's certainly not clear to me. Ones that I think are pretty important for us to go forward with, which are, what are the components of integrated behavioral health that really are most contributing to good patient outcomes? What kind of elements of what we offer tend to be included most often in people who kind of refer to themselves as doing integrated behavioral health? And certainly, what are the barriers that are involved? Certainly, we want to hear about the clinical barriers, but also the administrative and financial barriers, because one of my main roles with our outfit is to oversee the 13, 14 clinics we have, and just understanding how difficult it can be from a variety of different perspectives, but better understanding that so that we can, again, promote or address those problems. Questions simply is what proportion of patients in this country are receiving care through sites that refer to themselves as integrated behavioral health? David Humphreys, I'm glad you're making this an international call. Welcome. So it's not just the U.S., but wanting
Hi,
to be
Bill.
Good morning, or actually for you, good afternoon, or maybe
Thank you.
it's already happy hour there.
It is, yes.
And really, what's important is from the CFHA standpoint, what data, what evidence do we need to be really gathering to promote our kind of policy agendas? So the solution, Rusty, if you will, is one possible solution is the development of a PBRN. Now, again, most of the people on this call, I assume, are pretty well acquainted with what PBRNs are, but certainly Rusty will review for us what the state of the state is with PBRNs currently. But it's really an opportunity for us to collaborate. And quite frankly, I think not only kind of promote or help support our policy efforts in advancing the field, but it may also be an opportunity to expand our membership. If it's an opportunity and there's value for participants in such a network, it might be a really good selling point for them to become members and, again, strengthen our position as well. So next slide, if you would, Rusty. I mean, this is now 20 years old, but this schematic really, for me, captured the benefit of why would you kind of put in the effort to get people who may not be very well versed in doing research or collaborating with other clinics, other health systems. It's because most of the research, that little white space in the bottom, represents the fact that, it's less than 1% of the patient population who actually may be contributing to the data. When you look at randomized controlled trials, highly controlled, structured designs, it's a minority, a fraction of a minority of patients that it represents. BraveNet there is kind of in the middle in red, showing that Rusty will describe one example of a current PBRN he's involved in. But really the 200 or so patients are still not a full representation of the patient population, but certainly better understanding how do these things get disseminated and implemented when we try and take the hard evidence from randomized controlled trials and put them into practice in the real world. So the next slide, very quickly, again, assuming some familiarity for people, but the AHRQ definition from years ago, it's a group of practices that are devoted to primary care of patients. And really their mission is to investigate or kind of to address questions that are relevant to a community-based practice to improve the care that they deliver, and having a sense that they're committed to network activities, that not everything is going to be of equal interest to them. But again, the sum is greater than the parts that go into it. What's critical is that there's an organizational structure, and that's really what the majority of the remainder of our points will be about. How do we going to become aware of what makes a sustainable structure for this to occur? It's not just involved in a single research project or a single R01 or source of funding. And critically, it's linking the clinicians and the people practicing with investigators and really leveraging the skills of both and enhancing certainly the research skills of people who would otherwise not be able to develop those skills because, again, it requires an infrastructure that is just beyond their capacity. And the last slide I think I have maybe is certainly it's engaging people on the front lines. They are equal partners in identifying or prioritizing the questions that are asked, the data that might be collected, and also helping us through kind of in the trenches. How is this data going to be collected that's of quality that allows us to interpret the findings and then certainly implement them? But critical is that it's both top down and bottom up. The leadership, referring to, let's say, the leadership of the network itself, wants to kind of push, promote, encourage clinics to participate in a variety of different projects. But critical is that the clinicians, the providers themselves, are helping kind of drive what's important to them. So it truly is about translation, again, bilateral, back and forth, and it makes things very generalizable. So Rusty, I went through those fast, but I think you're up.
Yeah, I think the next few slides are going to reiterate some of the things that Bill said or emphasize them a little bit, but PBRNs are a little bit different animal because they blur distinctions between research and quality improvement, researcher and participant, practice and community, you know, in the sense that it's very much driven from what you're doing today in practice. That's the source of the data. And a lot of those things, we get into arguments all the time with our IRBs about, is this really research? Or is this just quality improvement? You know, am I randomizing people? Am I needing to consent people? Am I exposing the world to their PHI? You know, those are all elements of sort of higher level research that, you know, requires IRB oversight. And a lot of times what we're doing in our studies is actually trying to improve the quality of our practice. We're using aggregate data that doesn't reveal PHI, and we're doing essentially the same things to everyone. So we're monitoring how that's affecting people. And there's lots of back and forth about the methodologies for that and everything, but I think these are some of the distinctions that are blurred when you do practice-based research in a PBRN. And it also changes your view about how you think about who the study populations are. You know, this is, you know, maybe everybody we see or everybody who, you know, calls to see us. We think about inclusion criteria a little bit differently. We want to be broader, if you will, in practice-based research because that enhances the ability to disseminate and generalize the findings. If you know, make the exclusion so intense that you're really dealing with a tiny subset of patients we see, then what's the relevance in general in practice about your conclusions? You know, how do you think about interventions? You know, and about biases and about analytics. These all sort of change when you're doing practice-based research. It was interesting. I had a long conversation with Wilson Pace, who that's one of my punchlines in the last slide. You know, this guy is a fount of historical and current knowledge about PBRNs. And I asked him, you know, how many PBRNs are active? And he said, I'm not quite sure where you could find that information. So I actually looked on the AHRQ site and there's 186 PBRNs listed. It's unclear how many of them are still active. And I'll show you that in a minute. And you can think of them as being divided into sort of, you know, kind of 3 or more you know, ways that you can divide PBRNs. There's even ways on the website that you can take a look at a subset of them by state or by purpose. So there's strong regional and national PBRNs, and Wilson Pace's DARTnet is one of the national PBRNs. The AAFP National Research Network is another one. There are larger data collaboratives, and I always have to write down the name, what the hell these initials mean. But these are clinical research networks, and I would sort of maybe draw a distinction between PBRNs and them because these are giant data repositories of millions of patients, like 40 million patients, like, you know what I mean, large data sets. And the ability for an individual member or node to be able to sort of use that database is very complicated and very challenging. And so it's not necessarily the scale at which I think we should be thinking about at the moment with one exception we'll get to. And then there's even specialty focused PBRNs. So OCHN is a national network sort of centered in Oregon, but focused on federally qualified health centers. BraveNet, which I'll give a brief example of in a little bit, is our integrative medicine network, PBRN. And so you can slice and dice PBRNs in a lot of ways. These are the two behavioral health PBRNs in the AHRQ database. And I know at least one of them is still active. I think the Texas one is still active. It was a little hard to figure out whether the first one was still active. You know, you have to click on them and find their website and go to their website and see if somebody's home. You know, it doesn't go to an error page or whatever. But 60 of the PBRNs in the AHRQ database report a behavioral health focus. So people are at least, I think this is a reflection of integration of behavioral health nationally. You know, that it is on people's minds, or at least on 60 of these PBRNs, they report that focus. This I found was sort of humorous. So this is on, you know, because this whole discussion is a little bit of deja vu all over again. You know, I always joke about my brilliance and my creativity. I never come up with an idea that somebody hasn't already done 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And the CCRN is still, this is the Collaborative Care Research Network. It's still listed on the AHRQ, you know, database. And I think that what I want to do is sort of a note of encouragement is show you that at the bottom there were 146 clinicians who signed up, 84 practices in 27 states. So there is an appetite for this in our group. So hold that thought. I want to go over just a few areas of governance. These sort of reinforce a little bit of what Bill said before. One of the things that's important is to figure out who owns the PBRN. This will relate to funding in a minute that I'll talk about. But, you know, would it be CFHA? Would it be a foundation that we started? Is it important for it to be a 501c3? This is actually of some importance. There certainly needs to be an executive steering committee to make overall decisions and to decide these policy, operating policies that I've listed here. You know, Bill mentioned the top-down, bottom-up content and process of research ideas that the network would take up, some sort of vetting process to decide whether something's worthy to, you know, take up. Who's responsible for any specific project? You know, is it how much it is at the core? How much is it the group of 4 or 5 practices that want to do this? How do you care and feed the membership and decide who is in and who is not in? There have to be some data sharing agreements. Sometimes these can be very legalistic and formalized depending upon your own institution. And a basic question always comes up about, do you allow some other who to participate, you know, without partnering with or make a requirement to partner with one of the members of the PBRN. Funding is really, 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 really important, and it's perhaps the central question. There has to be core infrastructure funding for ongoing support between projects that may or may not be funded. So if you're going to do something that is of great interest to the practices, pardon me, but for which you don't have funding, does the PBRN have enough funding to carry it off by itself? Some infrastructure support can come from funded projects. If you get a big NIH grant, pardon me, that, you know, that comes with 58% overhead, then you may be able to support infrastructure for the PBRN through that overhead. But there are some ins and outs related to that, and that is that in the R grant indirects down there under sources, the clinician who's the PI has to be in the PBRN, and that has to be the organization that's applying for the grant. So if you have members that belong to their academic organizations around the country, they can't be doing it under the guise of their local jersey that they're wearing. They have to be doing it under the guise of the PBRN's jersey in order to qualify to receive NIH indirects. This is something that I went over at length with Wilson. I'm not sure I totally understand it, but it sounds a bit tricky, but has potential great payoff if you're going to do something that actually has federal funding. You could also charge a fee to members. You could also make an argument to your clinical you know, entities that you're embedded with that this improves practice quality. and achieves other reporting goals so that you might ask for partial support from your clinical partners at home, because this improves your practice. Certainly our system at UCSD is very supportive of our IBH effort to the tune of, a few $100,000 a year in supporting our ongoing ability to deliver services. Leadership, to get a little bit more microscopic, you need network leaders. These are usually part-time people, and you need clinician directors, I think. I think that's sort of, I'm not sure it's absolutely required, but the intimate next immediate partner is a research director who really knows what they're doing, in the area of research. And then you need at least a network coordinator / plus minus an administrator to really run the show, take care of all these logistic things and all these existence things that make you findable by others and reachable and have a presence. Would lead recruitment, application process, database of members, etc., communications. Infrastructure support can be additional in terms of space and IT being very, very important. Additional core expertise. As the PRN grows, you don't necessarily need all these experts at the outset. This sort of depends on the scope of the projects you're doing, and whether or not you can beg, borrow, and steal that from your local institutions at the node level. You also need support at the member level. So somebody has to be the lead. Somebody has to answer the phone when the PBRN calls and wants to do a top-down, kind of effort, or be the connector to the PBRN if you have a bottom-up project that you'd like to share with others or do with others. And there do need to be local IS resources, because if you're going to share data from each of the nodes participating in the PBRN, you have to be able to export that data and send it north. That takes some IS expertise. And then there's my favorite Jim Mold concept. Jim Mold's in Oklahoma, developed this term practice enhancement associates. These are people who operate within your clinical shop, know your clinical shop, are known by your clinical shop, but have research skills, SRA type research skills that can really help effect the research at the local level, or the data collection at the local level, or the intervention at the local level. Lots of challenges and issues, trying to generate topics of focus and interest. I remember going to our first 15 SurfNet meetings when I got here. They were always at a restaurant, which probably wasn't a good idea in retrospect. And they led to hundreds of pounds of information and discussion and very few actions. And so I think that's, I don't think with Jen and others who are leading the research and evaluation committee, that'll be a problem. But you do have to find things that are of focus and interest to the broader population of people in the PBRN. You have to deal with all the data compatibility and quality and all that kind of stuff, standardization across diverse settings of the way data is stored, the way practice is carried out, all kinds of IRB and regulatory issues you have to deal with when you're doing a study in a PBRN, different information system platforms. I use Cerner, I use Epic, I use Abacus, that kind of thing. And then you have to do a lot of things to keep the participants engaged, which is frequent communication back and forth. You have to emphasize the clinical applicability of studies. In other words, data needs to go back to the participants, the people generating the data for the study. They have to see the benefits of that generation and collection of data and analysis of data to feed back to them to improve their quality improvement, their practice transformation, their benchmarking, their reporting to their own agencies.
Rusty, if I can, for me, this has been really critical over the last couple of years of me thinking of this and trying to figure out, what may have been underappreciated with the Collaborative Care Research Network, certainly even in SurfNet, is that I think we really need to focus on what's the value of participants, because, we might have our own agenda, but I think whether it be helping them achieve other reporting requirements for other agencies, benchmarking what they do, making sure that the questions there that are important to them are frequently enough included in kind of the ask for whatever the latest kind of data capture might be. I think this is really something that, in addition to funding, compared to my previous experiences, including with CCRN, really need to think through how do we make sure that people are engaged, and it requires a fair amount of infrastructure to keep them engaged. So. Right.
Yeah, and I will say that, I mean, the number of people who signed up for CCRN makes me pretty positive and optimistic about that, and the types of questions that we still need answers to that Bill went over initially. Those all still resonate the hell out of me, resonate with me, significantly. I think the other thing that's important in the leadership realm is that the leaders have to really stick with this. They have to really be in it for the long haul. I say about any innovation that occurs anywhere, it's several years, many years before it becomes institutionalized, so that the leaders could get hit by a bus and the organization or the effort will still continue. So I think that's really, really, really important. I just give this an offered comparative. BraveNet, this is another part of my life that I've been involved in the last 15 years in parallel to integrated behavioral health. We have a specialty focused, very parallel, it's integrative medicine. It was birthed through the Academic Consortium of Integrative Medicine and Health. It has about 35 academic community partners. I always think of things in terms of adulthood and majority versus younger than that. And it's probably in its child and adolescent years at the moment. It's done one big study that involved 17 members, and it's birthed a few more. It's an idea generator from participating members. So 4 or 5 members will get together and do something. I'm involved in an NCCIH funded study that involves 4 members of the BraveNet committee. It has an executive committee. We talked about this with leadership, with a board of 4 to 5 people and a chair. And it has infrastructure support. The original Bravewell Foundation that helped found the academic consortium also founded the BraveNet Research Network and provided support for the personnel that you see listed there. And this support was at Einstein initially. It's now been transferred to the Samueli Foundation at UCI, because Samueli gave $200 million to UCI for integrative medicine. So when you've got that kind of money, you can do noble things. And these are the personnel. So you can see that this is really about 1 FTE if you add it up. So it doesn't take hundreds of millions of dollars to do a PBRN, but it takes very committed people that are funded in part somehow. So the questions and the next steps for the group to kick off the discussion is, where should a CFHA network be housed? I mean, obviously the first question is, should we do this or not? And the thing that, as I said, I just want to reiterate the fact that the CCRN, if you read the development papers, there's a lot of narratives that were written down about how this happened, because CJ Peak was involved in helping to document how this evolved. And it's fascinating reading in a couple of pages about how it happened and how natural and appropriate it felt. The CCRN achieved support from the AAFP's National Research Network. It became a sub-network in that larger network, which is a possible path to go in. And it had a couple of leaders who, shall we say, didn't quite stick with it, I think. I'm not trying to sort of, cause a big discussion, but I'm just saying, I think that's part of what happened, is that they really need to stick with it.
Well, and I think more too. I think my takeaway from CCRN was that Ben, God bless them, both Ben and Roger, it was awesome. And the number of members that were involved shows the interest. But I think having a larger cohort of an executive steering committee, having 4, 5, 6 people would be probably better for sustainability.
Right. I think a gang can make things happen. And there is national momentum for PBRNs. I'm having exactly the parallel discussion in the Association of Departments of Family Medicine right now. They're having a big research futuring, retreat at NAPCRAG in the fall. And a big section of that is going to be, or a component of that is going to be about PBRNs. And so the question would be whether we should strategically join an existing PBRN infrastructure like we did before in CCRN. What's the process of selecting a steering committee? And again, the value proposition that Bill was talking about, and prioritization of questions and things like that. And here's where I would sort of make a giant recommendation, that if the leadership of the REC committee and CFHA in general is interested in this, I would strongly encourage a consultation with Wilson Pace. When I was on the conversation with him the other day, he had just come from and was headed to 2 additional PBRN consultations around the country. So this is what this guy eats, lives, and breathes, and we would be wise to learn from him. So I'll end there, and we can kick off the discussion, and I'll stop sharing.
Well, this has been terrific. Thank you so much, Bill and Rusty. I keep getting your first name because
I'll
it comes
fix
up as
mine.
your real name, and I'm
Yeah.
like, it's Rusty, but it's. I can't tell you how much it's useful to have just the overview of PPRNs. Before we talk about kind of how it could be utilized within CFHA, I'm just curious if there's anybody on the call besides myself who've actually utilized a PBRN or is a member of a PBRN and could, very briefly share maybe how you used it and what your experience has been.
Yeah, hi, this is Verna from Concert. I actually did start a PBRN with an FQHC that I worked with for many years, the Institute for Family Health. And I think we learned a lot from doing that. And I would be really supportive of pursuing a PBRN. I think we talked to some others and maybe see if there's options for partnering, but I would be really in support of us pursuing this.
And Verna, is there anything from that prior experience, like what is your motivation? What drives your motivation? Because I think for those who are not as familiar with the PBRN, I think it's going to depend on how we kind of, those of us who have had experiences with it might be able to share like what the value is. Besides what we've heard already.
Yeah, I think one of the big things was that we were able to do research with our community partners. It was clinician and provider and organization driven as opposed to more academia. And it was just a really nice process to be able to have our partners to research with us.
Thank you. I didn't catch the last piece. I'm not sure if others had sound issues, but that might just be because I'm on a federal computer and it always causes issues. But thank you, Verna. That's helpful.
I just want to add one experience that I've had with the BraveNet squad. I mean, it was sort of very telling to me. As I said, about generating ideas among the group, when you bring the node representatives together, they find out that there's 4 or 5 of them that are interested in something. And it may be that one of them actually has some significant expertise and track record in the area. And so you can sign on as sort of a junior partner, and that's what we did at in our shop with an NCCIH funded project on acupuncture in the emergency room. We could deliver on the nodal end, to be a participant. And then I'm learning a lot about conducting federal research, in a randomized controlled trial, which is a little bit the end, the more sophisticated end of what PBRNs can do. But it does give you the opportunity to meet other people who know what they're doing, and to play along. So.
I'd echo Verna's comments in the sense that it was really nice for me. I got involved with the local PPRN for a project I'm working on, and the VA makes it difficult to be a member of PPRN, but I can kind of participate distantly. And it was just nice to meet other people in primary care who had similar interests as mine. And it's led to, in a land, especially now where everything's virtual, it is nice to have that community and be able to kind of engage in that community. the idea is, you feel like you may be alone in kind of your interest area, and then all of a sudden you bring it to them and they're like, no, that's actually really interesting to us too. And sometimes for the same reasons and sometimes for different, but it didn't really matter because we had the same goals. It was always about improving patient care, but my interest was because I was interested in improving suicide prevention for veterans. Their interest was also that, but it was an added bonus, which JACO was kind of pushing on them to have some outcomes related to suicide prevention. So it was sharing those interests and having that kind of community locally. Now, this was just a local PBRN, a regional one in the New York State area of primary care practices that I worked with, nothing as big as BraveNet, but I thought that was valuable. So any other people who have any personal experiences or questions before the next step is for us to kind of talk about, like, what is the interest in doing this within CFHA? There's a way, there's multiple paths. I think Bill and Rusty have talked about those. We could establish a PPRN within our organization. We could also mimic some of the aspects of a PPRN to begin kind of seeing whether there's interest there. I think there's a lot of different paths we could go, but before we kind of engage in that, I just want to make sure everybody had a chance to speak if you've had personal experiences. Okay. Then, yeah, so why don't I open the floor? Any thoughts related to kind of this idea of a PPRN and whether CFHA and its members have interest in this area? I really appreciate Rusty and Bill looking on the CCRN. I didn't realize that stuff was still available, and identifying that 146 practices are still like identified in that is kind of useful.
So I'll go ahead and get us started. My general thought is CFHA might be a good connector for its members to get people in touch with PBRNs that might best meet their needs. I think trying to, do much more than that creates a pretty heavy lift on CFHA that already has, I think, fully engaged, volunteered and paid staff. So, it could be a one-stop hub, or if you wanted to know information, click on this, here are websites to go to. Those are some of my initial thoughts.
So kind of taking some of the essence of what a PPRN accomplishes, maybe bringing people together with shared interests and then linking them with existing PPRNs, maybe one path we could take as the research evaluation committee is trying to figure it out. Any thoughts about that? Or
Chris, do you have ideas? I'm sorry, Chris, do you have ideas in terms of that would benefit ideally the individual members or health clinic system sites that then join a PBRN? How might that then result in helping CFHA's kind of policy arguments or agenda from an organizational standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm not really sure that it can, but if that's something that is important to the CFHA membership and leadership, determining what would be the goal for us to do that. How is it going to improve us as an organization? Because we know we've got a lot of different, I think, SIGs and very bright, hardworking people doing different things that sort of, create a service through CFHA, but I don't know that they necessarily quote unquote benefit CFHA. I guess it depends on how you define benefit. I think my experience sometimes is that integrated behavioral health people or mental health people want to reinvent wheels that are already out there and can already be popped onto the car or vehicle that you want. So, if we can be the information hub where, hey, I need this wheel for this vehicle because I want to go from A to B. Well, if they're part of our organization or colleagues with somebody, then it's sort of a one-stop shop for them instead of, like Wilson couldn't even tell you who were the active PBRNs. And it sounds like on the AHRQ website, it's still not really sure. So can we do some investigation, figure out what's actually active, what systems are they using, what are they generally doing, and then sort of have a menu board, almost serving CFHA, almost serving as a broker. But what benefit it would have to us as a CFHA, I'm not sure.
I guess I would sort of just make the comment that I always felt that CFHA was a proselytizing organization. In other words, its job wasn't just the care and feeding of people who were already just changing tires, but it's it was also designed to sort of get other people off a horse and buggy and into a car. And I think that any organization that's an idea-driven guild, which is the way we used to sort of describe CFHA. I don't know if that's still true or not, but it is, its responsibility is to provide evidence and argument that this idea is worthy of replication and dissemination. And as I used to say, we've done a great job in FQHCs, we've done a great job in the military, we've done a great job in academic medical centers, we've done a rather crappy job in Aetna and universal, healthcare and Blue Cross, and for the 100 million Americans that get their insurance and their healthcare, de rigueur. And so I think that the original driving force behind CCRN, was really to create that database or to create pieces of that data that would be used to convince our clinical brothers and sisters, as well as our system brothers and sisters, to adopt integrated behavioral health universally. I'm actually going to be on a call right after this that's from CFHA on where the docs have gone, from CFHA. And, it's a lot of the sort of same discussion, the same purpose of the discussion. PBRN is another means to sort of expand integrated behavioral health. So enough proselytizing there.
No, I agree. I definitely think it's something that we could include for CFHA. Like, we can make a web page and the links and see how it's going. We can also do analytics to see how many people are going to the page and clicking on it and see, but I think it's important to offer it.
I was actually thinking more of a hybrid. I'm a little hesitant to leap into the PPRN, establishing a new PPRN, or cautious. I'm not sure what the word is. But there are aspects of a PPRN that I do think may be also valuable to consider. And are there ways to embrace those without having to have all the framework yet, not committing to a PPRN fully? And so part of it is the networking that I think, Chris, you were talking about. But the other part is the direct, like not directing, but the generation of ideas and then directing people, like giving them the option to participate. And so one of the things we've heard in the rec a lot is, obviously a lot of people use Epic as their medical record, and there's a lot more data that is being collected regularly through Epic. And a very, in my mind, one low-hanging fruit would be to kind of congregate a group maybe of interested members to talk about, are there data points that are being collected across practices or could be committed to being collected across practices that could be, kind of utilized as a large repository to answer some very interesting questions to probably those practices, that they would not only have their own data to use to answer that question, but they'd also have other people's data to use. And that would give them more diversity and not be so like focused on only on their one population, like that. It would give them more broad or generalizable data for the field. But I don't know how people felt about that, but I thought I'd share that.
I think the idea generation thing that you mentioned is very strong and very important, and I've seen it happen in BraveNet. And what you're basically saying is that then, if say 6 or 7 groups or people wanted to sort of do that kind of project together, you're leaving the solution for how to share the data, amalgamate the data, collect the data, and everything to them. So it's a group of, 4 or 5 people that then go on Zoom meetings endlessly and honcho their project. And I think what a PBRN does is basically act as a research core, like at the NIH, that would give them support to do that. But you could certainly take the half-pregnant leap and allow people to generate ideas, and then say, just sort of leave it to them. And then as they learn stuff, if they're committed to the project, they could teach the rest of CCR, of the rec committee, members and broader CFHA members, how to do that as well. And that might be a way to do it without really doing it, because you can't learn
guess
from
one of
each
my
other's data if you can't
concerns-
aggregate it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the path, right? PBRNs, like you talked about, need to have like kind of regular utilization for them to be successful.
Right.
And one of the things in our local PBRN, I don't know if this is national or not, is that path is not being utilized enough locally, especially since COVID. And so they're trying to restart it, but it is hard. It is, and is in my concern, I guess some of my cautiousness about leaping full into PBRN is that the initial excitement is great, and then the follow through though then dwindles. And so even in those existing PBRNs, and I would love to understand BraveNet's, like, is it that the path, it's kind of like our referrals for warm handoffs, right? And same day access, like, is it that once you get the path established, the habits there, it keeps going? Or do you always need the generator, like, feeding it so that you can keep, I just would love to understand that a little bit better, because that would be my concern.
No, for me, that is the issue about sustainability. I mean, no matter how it gets ramped up, only a cohort of 5 or 6 participating nodes. But one thing that I was kind of struck by was, even though there's sampling bias, that a number of the PBRNs that kind of counted themselves as most successful actually partnered up with institutions that had, clinical translational service awards. So I think that, one possibility that we kind of just threw on one of the slides is partnering. Are there some organizations, because it's that stability that will make or break it.
Yeah, I think there has to be the collective interest. The BraveNet meetings usually have, 12 to 20 people on them all the time. They're once a month, and that's how you gauge things. I mean, certainly if you have, only 4 or 5 people or 6 people that are interested, you can't really, sustain a PBRN. So that's why I tried to draw the distinction between the giant things and the sort of more manageable, smaller ones. It was just interesting to me when I found the CCRN site about how many people had signed up and thought it was a good idea. So if you have, 15 or 20 people on a call, there's not going to be, there's not really going to be a lack of interest and a lack of projects. Then you come to the sort of funding and infrastructure challenge. But if there's not collective interest in an ongoing, sustained way, then you're barking up the wrong tree.
Well, and I think that, you all have highlighted that this is sort of a large beast that you could really be involved with a variety of different areas. I mean, as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about even at the more basic level. So assuming that you have everything in place that you all talked about, well, does your electronic medical record, health record, like Epic, does it prompt providers to ask the questions that you're interested in, yes or no? Does it provide discrete data? Can you extract that discrete data in a set? I mean, even just basic stuff like that. Does it even have it? Do people know that they can turn certain things on? I mean, at a very basic level, you could set up all the other stuff you've talked about. But in my opinion, in my experience, if you don't have an electronic health record that prompts providers to ask the question, get discrete data in that, and being able to pull it out, you're going to be limited in what you can do, even if you have everything else set in place.
I mean, the answer for Epic is yes, 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 and yes. Can do all that. And but I mean, I think that not to exclude an FQHC that wants to participate, I think you can still collect data by hand. you can still do, you know, you have to, obviously, it has to be integrated, it has to be put into a computer as data at some point. But I don't know that, you know, that everybody has to necessarily be on Epic per se. And again, it depends on the scale that you're operating at. You know, if you're talking about people sharing an idea, I mean, I once had an idea, which I still think is a good idea, about a triple card, you know, a thing that has 3 copies of something, you know, a little 3x5 card with 3 copies, where our collaborative care folks would document when they interacted with each other. Just documented how many times they interacted with each other, because to me, that's a salient feature of integration. You know, and you would have a copy for, you know, each participant in the conversation, the copy for the data bank. You know, I mean, there's lots of ways to sort of do things that would be really salient if collected over 10 practices, you know, about a new measure of integration. You know, how often do we talk to each other? I don't think I've ever seen that published anywhere. So there's lots of ideas like that, I think I would say.
I think too that we're all kind of bringing up the legitimate concerns, the heavy lifts that might be involved. And I think, Chris, to your point, I think in terms of, you know, the value to our members could be that we could be a clearinghouse and broker, if you will, in some ways, and that might improve their skills and help them in a variety of ways. But I think the question for this group and beyond is, what's the value proposition for CFHA? And I think if we think about, you know, and we find that there is value, that as a group, we're going to be better working together rather than individually, and that there would be an evidence that would help us not only for the field, but for our organization from a policy standpoint and the like, then there's value. And then the question is, as long as we have realistic expectations of what it takes, and if those resources have to be shared with another organization. I mean, it's really, in talking with Naftali, he already from the get-go realizes this is a long-term proposition. And we just have to be realistic, because I think, again, not only was it, from my perspective, CCRN 10 years ago or whenever it actually came to be about, was, I think, underappreciated the importance of the value for members for prolonged, sustained engagement. And I think that more than just 2 like stars to run it, we needed a little broader representation for stability. So that's kind of how I'll leave it. I think there is value for the organization to do something like this, as long as people have realistic expectations and adequate kind of, you know, handful of people to push it forward.
And the gestational path is long and gradual.
Yes.
I mean, it's not gonna like, you know, you're not gonna, you know, celebrate, you know, at a year and with great, you know, success. It's a long labor, and I think skill sets grow, experience grows, accomplishment grows, and then, you know, it becomes a culture change. It becomes the culture change that it fosters. And I'm making this argument in ADFM, is that every clinician should be doing practice-based research, because it's how you make your performance better every day.
And reduces burnout, by the way, which a lot of people don't actually understand. But before, I recognizing the time, and there's several people on the call who, you know, this might be new information for you, but we really want to hear from all members. So I'm going to leave the last 4 minutes, and I would love to encourage you. I won't call on you because that would be mean, but would one of you please be willing to share kind of your thoughts about this topic and what you think as a CFHA member, because we actually do care about what you think.
Jennifer, can I jump in?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm following the conversation. I've been listening to it, and I'm sitting here in front. I've got a document in front of me, which I got last week, which is a funding opportunity which has been passed to my colleague, who is a GP, a PCP, who's been invited to bid for this. Okay, and because I know what's in this, in other words, I've had a chance. I'll tell you what it is in a minute. My immediate kind of thoughts are CFHA. This is a place where I think, you know, this is called pre-announcement collaborative community research to tackle health inequalities. Okay, I'm based in a primary care setting. This seems to me this is what you guys are about, you know. And what I would look for is, you know, I'm bearing in mind that the award range is 625,000 to 2.5 million pounds. So it's a chunk of money. It's not massive by anybody's stretch of the imagination, but you know. And so I look and I think, you guys have got the expertise. You know, I've got expertise in terms of what I do here, if you see what I mean. But it's about, is this making sense? I don't know what it is. That's what I look to, I guess. I think, hey, how can I tap in? How can I use the knowledge, the expertise, the skill, the experience? Because when I look around over here, we don't have that body of experience. I hear what Rusty says, and I agree. You know, some of these work, some of these haven't worked. But in a way, the very fact that some of them have, some of them still are, suggests. You know, I listen to Bill, and I mean, you know,
yeah.
I hear the passion in Bill's voice and about it, and I love that because I think it's, yeah. So that's where I come from. I come and think, and I say, what do I do with this?
Thank you, David. I think that's another value that wasn't mentioned about how you could utilize a PBRN is you get a funding opportunity, you see something, you want to do it, but you need more people. That would be the way to go. I see, Sarah, you turn on your camera, so now you're going to be picked on because you turned on your camera. And
yeah,
I want to give you a chance.
Yeah, I'm new to CFHA. I was in an FQHC prior to my current role, so I've just transitioned into a different role. But in my current role, I'm supporting like quality improvement and data in a healthcare sort of medical institution. But we not only we have primary care, but we also have other specialty clinics. And so one of the things that I'm trying to dig in deep on are like ratios of BH. What does integration look like specifically with specialty clinics? So like neurology, women's health, you know, how the work that we're doing is a little bit more specialized and may not necessarily fit. There are some components of it that could fit in a collaborative care model or a PCBH model, or what is the best model? How do we measure that? How are we measuring our impact in those settings? And I was thinking a lot about it just in terms of value-based care, but also in the way we're collecting our data. And if it's appropriate data, like are we aggregating folks in terms of DEI work? Are we actually separating it out? So definitely, I'm definitely interested in this and interested in collaborating and hearing what other folks are doing. So that's where my brain is as I was listening to all of this, and I was filling out the survey that was thrown in the box.
Thank you. And Sarah, thank you for sharing that. I think you know, you're not alone. Actually, the entire VA is shifting to that framework as well, trying to think about how to integrate our other specialty medical settings. We're starting with pain and oncology first. So I think there's going to be a greater, there's people in our membership who have that interest area. And I think you bring up a good like purpose of either PBRN or whatever we decide to do. I think the idea is to bring together people who are trying to kind of figure out these questions, and whether it's through an official PBRN or whether it's through something else more informal, we could serve as a background to bring those people together and push them forward, bringing both people with more expertise and less to kind of move that forward. So I'm recognizing the time, and I do know CFHA has another talk that I know is very popular amongst a lot of our members. So I will end it here. Thank you, Rusty. Thank you, Bill. You know, thank you, both of you. No, Rusty had to go, but for starting this conversation, I expect we'll probably have further conversations about it. And there was a link to a questionnaire that you'll also get probably through email if you don't mind filling out. But thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity. Look forward to seeing if we can move it forward.
Indeed. It was really great. Thank you so much, Bill.
You bet. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, David, for coming.
Bye-bye.
We always love your international presence.
A pleasure to be here. I really enjoy it. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. It's great. Appreciate
See you
it.
guys.
Thanks.
Take care.